Hello everybody and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol character spotlight. And today we are taking a look at the Prince of Asgard, Thor Odinson. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and get right into things here. So starting out his stat line here, Thor Odinson is 444, so even across the board here. He's got 7 stamina on the front side, and on his flip side that does change to 8. As far as I'm aware, that is the only change to his cards, so we're not going to be going back and forth here. But 7, 8 for stamina. He's a 5 threat, he's going to be size 2, and he is a medium mover. Thor's rocking in here with 3 attacks. The first one is his basic builder attack. It's going to be a 0 cost attack. It's going to throw 6 dice physical at range 2, and it's simply called Strike. After the attack is resolved, he's going to gain power equal to the damage dealt, and then it's got a wild throw. So before damage is dealt, if the target character is size 4 or less, this character may throw it away small. So right out the gate, we have a really impressive builder here on Thor. 6 dice is already relatively solid on a builder. You know, you'll usually build 1 or 2 power of that relatively consistently, if not more. But then having a wild throw, size 4 throw as well is really good to have on a builder. So yeah, crazy good builder attack there. Then we go into his second attack here. This is the hammer throw. This is a range 5 dice physical attack, but it costs 1 power. So a little bit less dice than his basic strike, but it's range 5, which is quite good. And after the attack is resolved, the target character gains the shock special condition. So personally, I find this attack is a little bit underrated. I think it's a really good attack for when you're still trying to get Thor into the fight, especially if you're against a more evasive team and you weren't able to do stuff like your charge turn 1, that sort of thing. You know, move up, throw a hammer, put a shock on someone who you know is going to be annoying in the next round, and then next turn you have the power for Asgard if that was all you did in the first turn, so you're able to get right into the fight. And we'll talk about his superpowers in a second because I realize I haven't actually went over for Asgard yet. But then he has the God of Thunder. This is his real spender attack. You know, the one before only costs 1 power, so it's not really a spender. But God of Thunder is a 4 cost, 7 dice, area 2 energy attack. And this attack has the exact same rules text actually as Hammer Throw, except it says each attack because it's an area. So everyone you hit with this area attack is going to gain the shock special condition. And yeah, it's not that bad as far as area attacks go. It's thrown 7 dice, which is relatively solid. It only costs 4 power, which isn't too bad. He is an Asgardian model, and we'll go over that in a second, but basically he gets more power every turn, so that'll help him get that a little more often. And it's an energy attack, which everything else on his card is physical, so it's nice to have that little bit of variety there, mixing things up when you have those really heavy physical defense models. So yeah, solid attack pool here. He's got some interesting ones. The spender is definitely a little underwhelming compared to his builder. It's only 1 die more and it's costing you 4 power, but it is an area attack, so if you can get a couple models in that, it's definitely worth throwing out here and there. He does have a leadership, we'll go over that in a moment, but for now we're going to take a look at Thor's card just as himself. So next we have for Asgard. This is the one we mentioned earlier. This is going to be a 3 cost active superpower. It's also going to take an action. This character immediately makes a move action followed by a strike attack action. So it is a specific attack. It's not like normal charges where you get to pick your attack. This one specifies the strike attack. If this attack action deals damage, the target character gains the stagger special condition. This superpower can be used only once per turn. So this is really good. I mean, his strike attack is more often than not the attack you would want to be making on a charge anyways. I could definitely see an argument for the hammer throw or something like that on occasion, but a lot of the time you're going to be wanting to go in with that strike anyways because it's going to build your power, it's going to have a chance to throw, and now if it deals damage, it's going to be staggering off of this charge. So that's really nice. That's a super helpful extra little bit to throw onto it here. You've now got a 6 dice attack that if it doesn't deal much damage, that's fine, because as long as it dealt at least 1, it's throwing out a stagger. If it gets a wild, it's going to throw. So there's multiple kind of levels of success with this attack here, which is really nice to see. It gives you a little bit to fall back on. Of course, the downside of that is none of that is guaranteed. It is all still dice. So you could fail to do damage and not get a wild, and that is unfortunate. And unfortunately, that is one of the kind of problems that Thor sometimes has as a character, is he is just incapable of hitting, that wild trigger on the throw or dealing damage on the strike, and it can feel a little bad, but we'll talk about some of the ways you can kind of get around that. Next, he has Strongest Avenger. This is an active superpower as well. It's also going to cost him 3 power. He's going to choose an interactive terrain feature or enemy character of size 4 or less within range 2, and he's going to throw it medium. The superpower can only be used once per turn. So this is great. Size 4 character to throws are fantastic. He can use it on terrain as well if he just wants to get some damage going, but it's also just great for control. Thor, in theory, in a single turn, could throw 3 different models, which is really, really powerful control. Especially since this one is medium as well, so you can get some really good distance on that as well. So yeah, lots of great things there in terms of in terms of control. Having this superpower is great. I mean, it's part of why some models see play is largely because they have a throw like this one. So that's great to see. And of course, Thor is an Asgardian, so during the power phase, he gains 1 additional power, as most Asgardians do. So that's going to help him because, as you probably noticed, his kit is a little bit expensive, with all of his superpowers costing 3 and his spender costing 4, and him having a not crazy impressive attack that still costs 1 power. So being an Asgardian, that kind of makes up for that a little bit. The hammer throw only costs half of his power that he gets during the power phase, so that's totally fine. And for Asgard and Strongest Avenger are only 1 power more than his power phase power, so that helps make up for and kind of offset that a lot. And then he has a couple of the kind of standardized ones. So he has flight, so that's just generally useful. He has a medium move, so it's definitely relevant. And then he's got immunity, shock, and stun. And those are both great immunities to have. I mean, Asgardians hate the stun condition in general, because it kind of shuts down the Asgardian ability. And then shock is also solid to have, especially on a model like this, where, as we've already talked about, kind of his main attack that he's going to be throwing out the most is kind of relying on doing damage and getting that wild trigger to really feel like he's pulling his weight as a 5 threat. So making sure he's always at least throwing 6 dice with it is definitely a big deal for Mr. Thor here. As far as tactics cards go, Thor is looking at 4 different tactics cards here. So the first one is Brothers in Arms. This is a card he shares with Beta Ray Bill. Thor Odinson and Beta Ray Bill may spend 1 power each to play this card. While within range 2 of each other this round, the characters that played this card gain the superpower shown below. The Worthy. This character may not be advanced, thrown, or placed by enemy effects. Additionally, this character adds 3 dice to all energy attacks it makes. So the first part of this card is really nice, actually. The anti, advanced thrown or placed by enemies is great. Notably, it doesn't actually include push in this, so you can still be pushed, you just can't be thrown, which is a weird exclusion, but definitely very, very relevant that it's not there. But still, that's a lot of the different types of control that you're just turning off there, so that's really nice, and of course both of them have it, so that can be one way to really help you kind of secure a specific point that you need to contest or anything like that. So that can be solved. And then in addition, you're going to be adding 3 dice to all energy attacks you make. So on Thor, that is just his spender, which I think is kind of funny because when you use his spender, you're actually hitting Beta Ray as well. So obviously, because it's an allied character, you're just dealing 1 to them instead of rolling the dice and applying the shock to them. But it is still a damage you're dealing to your own model, so it's a little bit of a weird anti-synergy there, but it does bring it up to 10 dice, so it is definitely a devastating spender if you can get it off under Brothers in Arms. So it's a kind of a cool card in that regard. In terms of kind of more competitive play, I don't know if it's all that good. If you're running the 2 models together, I could definitely see it being useful in the right matchup where your opponent's bringing a lot of that type of control, specifically throws or advances. I mean, things that remove the ability to be advanced or placed are really, really useful in those specific situations because only a handful of characters can do that, and they're not the types of control that you see the most often. So, Yeah, I think it's valuable to have stuff to cover that because not much else can. Indomitable, for example, doesn't protect you against advances or places, so there's not that much tech that's going to stop that sort of thing. And this is so it's got some value in that, but unfortunately, I find this just doesn't make the cut all that often. Next up, we have Overcharge. This is his team up card with Tony Stark, but it can also be played on Carol Danvers. So it's first of all, during Thor or Carol's activation, the active character can spend 5 power to play this card. So either Thor or Carol would be spending 5 power. Then you're choosing an allied Tony Stark within range 5 of the character that played this card, and he immediately makes the attack listed above, which is an area 2 6 dice. After each attack is resolved, gain 1 power. And then after each attack is resolved, the target character gains the shock special condition. So this is an interesting card. It's a cool idea. It's fluffy and it's fun. There are definitely situations where I could see it being a useful card if somehow Tony has ended up in the thick of things and Thor, I don't know, maybe he's been controlled away. There's definitely cases where I could see an argument for this card being played. Unfortunately, I do think it's not all that great in the grand scheme of things. It's going to cost you 5 power off of Thor to play this card, and I think Carol, it's even worse there because Carol wants to spend that power way less than Thor does. So I don't think either of them particularly love spending the power for this card, and the attack that you're getting out of it, while it is solid, it's going to power up Tony, which is really nice, and it's going to hand out those shocks. It isn't anything particularly amazing for what you're paying for it. As a 5 cost card, it could be better. One of the interesting things about it though is that it doesn't take one of Thor or Carol's actions, so it is an extra attack you can put out on your turn, which is cool and is definitely an upside to it. But unfortunately, I don't think it's quite enough for it to really see all that much play. Next, we have Get Help, or as it's improperly titled, Sibling Rivalry. If Thor, Prince of Asgard, is within range 2 of an allied Loki, God of Mischief, both characters may spend 1 power to play this card. So really, really importantly here, unless this gets errated, the new version of Loki that we have coming out will not be able to play this card, and similarly for the new version of Thor, because it specifies Thor, Prince of Asgard, and Loki, God of Mischief, and the new ones will have different names because this isn't their alias name; it's their character name. So really important to know there. Anyways, throw the allied Loki, God of Mischief, medium. Loki, God of Mischief, does not suffer collision damage during this throw. Enemy characters that he collides with roll 2 fewer dodge dice and suffer the stagger special condition. So this is actually, in my opinion, a really, really good card. Not only is it a fun card, I mean, it's a hilarious moment and it's a really cool kind of concept, but I do think it's a pretty solid card as well. Having an extra throw in there that, it's only costing 1 power off of Thor and 1 power off of Loki, that's not too bad. They can usually afford that. Getting a free throw where the target character rolls 2 fewer dice, which is a huge deal because most characters aren't rolling more than 3 or 4 to begin with. Um, and then it's also staggering whether it does damage or not. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in this. And then there's also an argument to just kind of, see the state of the board and say, hey, Loki could be sitting on that objective over there, so maybe I'm not going to use this card for value. I'm actually just going to use it to throw Loki onto that objective sort of thing. So it can have kind of a couple different ways you can use this card to get different types of value out of it in different situations, which I think is really cool. And yeah, I just think in general it's a pretty solid card. Of course, the one downside to it is you do have to keep Thor and Loki relatively close together, which can be a little hard to do since Loki generally isn't going to be able to take too much of a beating, so he's not always going to be right at the front of the lines. Obviously, his main attack is also a range 2, so he's going to have to be there once in a while. But I think you'll find that if you want to get this card off, you're going to have to be keeping in mind when you're positioning those models and doing their various things because otherwise it's going to be really easy to find them out of position of each other. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth the little bit of extra management trying to keep those two characters close together because I do think it has some really powerful effects and can be used in some really interesting ways that your opponents might not necessarily see coming as well. And lastly, we have Thunderwave. This is to team up with Captain America, and basically it is if it is Thor, Prince of Asgard's activation, and he is within range one of an allied Captain America, they may spend one power each to play this card. While within one of Captain America, Thor, Prince of Asgard may use the Thunder Wave attack shown above once. Range and line of sight are measured from Captain America instead of Thor, Prince of Asgard when making this attack. So yeah, the attack is a beam 5 6 dice energy attack. Absolutely no rules text. It's just a beam 5 really. And I think it's an interesting card. I mean, giving Thor a beam 5 attack is cool, and it's on the energy side. So if you can combine this with Brothers in Arms, so you also have Beta Ray Bill within range 2 of Thor, this becomes a 9 dice beam 5, which hits like an absolute truck. So there's definitely something interesting there. Mind you, then you're using two team up cards and you're bringing three specific characters, and whether or not that's good is its own debate, but there's at least some interesting things there. Overall, I do think this card is one that you're probably not going to be playing all that often. It requires them to be within range one of each other as well, which can be fairly restrictive. So I don't know how often you're going to be playing this card. If you're running Thor in Avengers, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well, I do think it's kind of worth at least considering because it does give him some interesting play and some interesting angles to be able to play around with. But because it's only a range one away from Steve when you make this attack, you're not going to find yourself in the situation where you're actually able to do it all that often, unfortunately. So I think it's just got a few too many limiting factors and doesn't quite hit hard enough unless you're doing that Beta Ray Bill thing to really be worth the tactics card slot a lot of the time, unfortunately. All right, so going into the affiliations, and before we get into those, we are going to have to talk about his leadership here. So he is the Prince of Asgard. This is obviously for Asgard, and at the start of each of your turns, one allied character may spend one power. If they do, remove one damage or one special condition from that character. Each allied character may use this leadership once per round. So personally, I think this is a really, really solid leadership. Being able to remove damage is great, obviously, but more so, I think being able to remove special conditions and being able to do it at the start of each of your turns on each character, and it's only costing you one, which in Asgard isn't too bad because most characters are generating two per turn anyways. So this can be really, really great. This can remove staggers. This can remove pesky shocks before you're about to go. This can remove incinerate when your opponent's been hitting you really hard. And keep in mind that a lot of Asgardians really do rely on defensive dice. Not many of them have things like damage reductions or anything like that to keep them alive. So stuff like incinerate can be really, really annoying there. So being able to remove those kind of really annoying conditions is great, and it kind of makes it so condition teams have a hard time dealing with Asgard. So it's a really solid leadership in that regard. It does cost power, so there is a drawback to it, but I think it's relatively fair considering how powerful that could be, especially with some of the characters you could splash into that leadership. You know, stuff like Hulk suddenly has condition removal, and that's really, really good. And you know, tons of characters can benefit from that who just kind of really hate certain conditions that can shut them down. The one downside to that, of course, being a lot of those characters are higher threat characters, and Thor is already a 5 threat leader. And as we'll see in a minute, Asgard kind of has a lot of higher threat models. They're kind of averaging around 4, whereas a lot of other affiliations have a lot more 3s and stuff to help fill in the gaps. So it's not, you know, terrible, it's not unplayable or anything like that, but you do have to kind of keep that in mind that you're playing with a 5 threat leader. So if you're splashing a high threat character like a Hulk, you're already starting out at, you know, 11 threat, and that's not technically affiliated yet. So you're going to have to play around with that and kind of decide what sacrifices are willing to make for that. But as the leadership goes, it's quite good. You know, Thor hates being staggered. He can't be stunned, but a lot of the other Asgardians hate being stunned, so being able to pull it off of them is great. Um, there, you know, even stuff like poison can really slow down some of these characters, Thor himself. So, you know, being able to pay one power to get rid of that, and you know, you won't feel the effects of that right away, but over the course of the game, stuff like that can really add up. So It's great, and then the healing as well is pretty solid, especially when you do have some really bulky models in your affiliation, like Beta Ray Bill, for example, who healing damage on him can be really obnoxious because getting damage on him can be really obnoxious. So there's definitely a lot of interesting characters with that leadership. It's a relatively straightforward leadership. My biggest problem with it is that I forget to use it all the time, and I'm halfway into my turn. I'm like, oh, it would have been great if I had done this, but that's just part of the learning curve. Obviously, if I played Asgard more, I'm sure I'd be better with it. But it is one of those things of the timing on it is relatively specific, and in a more competitive game, your opponent might not always let you take it back. So just got to keep that in mind when you're playing it. But it is a really solid leadership, and I think is definitely it can really help a lot of characters not necessarily shine more than they normally do, but it can turn off some of their weaknesses, which is certainly a really powerful thing. I mean, just look at stuff like Guardians and how powerful the card Crew of the Milano is for the reason of being able to remove conditions, turns out is pretty good. So with that said, Thor is a part of two affiliations. Obviously, he is the leader of Asgard, and when we're talking about synergies for Thor, there's a couple things that I'm kind of looking for with him. The first one being power. If I'm giving him people who can help him get a little bit more power a little bit more often, stuff like putting his charge online early in the game and things like that. Those are things that I really value with Thor. And then other things I really like with him is dice consistency, because if you can give Thor dice consistency, if you can give him a couple rerolls here and there, I think that can really help turn his kit kind of up to 11. That pivotal strike we were talking about earlier with that for Asgard, where you really want to be doing damage, you really want to be getting those wilds. If you can push that, if you can make that more likely, it's a big deal. So I think when we're thinking about characters that want to synergize with him, you really want to consider those sorts of things. And specifically in affiliation, I think there's two models that kind of help with that. One obviously being Heimdall. Heimdall has dice fixing, which is something that, as far as I'm aware, for the most part, the rest of the affiliation doesn't have. So I know Heimdall is kind of a lesser played character, which always confuses me because when I see him on the table, he always seems to do really well. Maybe eventually I'll do a video on him as well because I think he's a really interesting character, and I do think he's really important to a model like Thor and making sure he's online. And I think one of the reasons we don't see him that much is just because there's a lot of really good characters in Asgard, so he kind of doesn't always make the cut. But he has a couple things that Thor really appreciates. Notably, just being able to reroll some of his attack dice is a big deal. And note that because Heimdall is also an Asgardian, he's doing this every turn if he wants to. Of course, for only one attack, unless he's built up more power. But that's really useful for things like that. So that's quite good. Another character that I think he synergizes reasonably well with is Loki, partially for the card and partially for once Loki is on his flip side here. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Once Loki's on his flip side here, the God of Mischief turns off your opponent's crits, which is just going to help you put through a little bit of extra damage here and there. Not the biggest deal in the world, but like I said, Asgard doesn't have much in the way of dice fixing, so anything really helps there. But the real reason why I like him with Loki is just for the get help tactics card. So there's that. But yeah, the rest of Asgard, like none of these models are necessarily bad synergies with him. Scourge in particular, I think can be really interesting because he does have that right hand man ability to take hits for Thor, so that could be quite good because Thor has solid defensive dice and a decent amount of health, but he doesn't have any actual defensive tech in the form of, he has no built-in rerolls or damage reduction or anything like that. So he can just kind of go down, which, Asgard does have tools for as well in the form of Odin's Blessing, the tactics card. But having someone there to help keep him alive on those really pivotal turns can be a big deal. So I definitely don't mind him with someone like Scourge either. And of course, a lot of the other models in Asgard that we haven't mentioned are just generally really powerful models like Beta Ray Bill or Hela now. So there's a lot of good options to bring with him there in affiliation. So that's really good for Mr. Thor there. His other affiliation is Avengers, and if we go ahead here and open up the Avengers roster, as we're aware, Avengers has 4 separate leaders, and I'm going to talk very briefly about most of these, but first of all, Steve 1 definitely checks the box of being a leadership that's going to give him the ability to do that charge more often, the ability to do the throw more often. He's just going to be giving him a little bit of extra power efficiency, meaning, even if he's not doing any damage, he's either got the charge or the throw online every single turn. So that's a big deal, obviously. Having both of those online, specifically turn one, is a big deal, and for that reason, I like them with Steve One. There is the card that they have together, which is interesting, but as previously mentioned, I don't know if it's necessarily good enough to be running it all that often. For what it's worth, Sam can use that card as well because he is just Captain America. There's no other text on it, so it works. So he can Thunderwave with Sam as well, which is interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily good. But yeah, I think as far as Avengers leaderships go, Steve is probably one of my favorite leaderships to put him under just because it gives him that ability to do his thing every single turn if he wants, which feels really good. Next, there's Sam. Unfortunately, I don't think he quite fits the type of list that Sam's going for. He doesn't need that much in the way of mobility because he already kind of has that with his charge. Healing is nice, but not super necessary. Condition removal is solid. He doesn't have his leadership if he's playing in Avengers, so being able to get it from Sam's is solid, but he doesn't really fit the kind of idea for Sam of running lower threat models that are bulkier and stuff like that. He doesn't quite fit that, so I don't know if it's the best place for him. I don't think it's necessarily bad, just not, insanely good there or anything like that. We do also have New Steve, which I think New Steve can be really interesting with him because New Steve's leadership will make those wilds a lot more consistent on his strikes there. And because it's a builder, if you're dealing damage, that's also going to be building you back the power that you're spending, so you don't feel too bad about spending into that because most of the time Thor's favorite attack to be using is that builder attack anyways. That's also going to help you get the stagger trigger on the 4 Asgard, so I think there's a lot to like about running him under New Steve. I haven't gotten the chance to play around with it myself all that much yet, but I do think it's probably a really good home for him because it's kind of the most consistent you can get attack dice, which I think is really, really solid. So there's definitely some value to that. We're not really going to talk about Hulkbuster's leadership all that much. Reduced damage on collisions is the same value to everyone, which unfortunately isn't all that much value, but it is there. It's certainly a leadership, and Thor doesn't dislike it. He just doesn't care all that much. He's already rolling 4 dice on physical, which is solid. Reducing the damage by 1 is a fine thing to throw on top of that, and in the right matchup, I'm sure it's okay. But for the most part, probably pick a different leadership most of the time, just in general with Avengers, unfortunately. As far as other characters go, as before, we're really just looking for stuff that can give him rerolls, stuff like Stark here, who's going to have that Jarvis AI to give him some rerolls here and there, can be pretty solid. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if there's any others that I can think of. I'm sure there are, and they're just not coming to me right now. But yeah, stuff that'll help his dice consistency is really all he cares about. And one thing I didn't mention under Asgard, but I do think it's more relevant under Asgard than it is under Avengers, is bringing the tactics card Advanced R&D. I think Advanced R&D is a really interesting card for him in Asgard specifically because everyone in Asgard is a decent model to be playing that card with. And that can help power up a couple of your other Asgardian characters to be able to do some of their stuff turn one because a lot of them are paying the kind of what's known as the Asgardian tax of because they get 2 power, all of their superpowers are 3. And Thor is definitely one of the biggest victims of that. He can't do any of his stuff turn one, but if you can use advanced R&D off of somebody else, doesn't really matter who it is, but it preferably someone who doesn't have stuff that they're going to be doing turn one, then Thor can now have his charge online and his throw and whatever he wants to do turn one, which can hopefully start building him into having really effective turn twos and threes and so on for the rest of the game. But yeah, that's something that I forgot to mention when I was talking about Asgard, and I figured I should probably mention here. As far as other affiliations go, I think we're kind of looking for the same thing we were looking for in synergies within the two that he's a home in. So dice consistency obviously is a big one, and then also power. So anywhere that's going to give you rerolls or extra power, whether it's, A Force giving you a little bit of power here and there, Guardians of the Galaxy giving you a couple rerolls, that could be really, really good for Thor. There's Inhumans even. He serves as a kind of a decent battery there too, because once he's rolling, he might have a little bit of extra power, so he's willing to pass some off to some of the other characters, so he can be solid there. Wakanda and Shield, they both have a reroll leadership, so he certainly appreciates those types of leaderships there. So there's stuff like that where I think he can be pretty solid. I'd say there's even a small argument for something like Goblin Foes, helping him push through a little bit more damage on that builder once in a while. Not quite giving him the consistency on the wilds, but every little bit kind of counts with Thor here. So yeah, I think there's a few places where he can be relatively solid. I certainly don't think he's a bad model in any way. I personally have been playing around with him for a long time in Avengers. He's been in and out of my roster because I really want him to be able to replace Hulk for me personally. I just, he does a lot of the same things that a Hulk does. He just does it without having some of that extra durability. And he doesn't hit quite as hard, only being 6 dice as opposed to Hulk's 7+ as he takes damage. So but personally, I think he does a lot of really good things. I mean, having the ability to potentially throw 3 times in a single turn is really, really good. And if you can use some of those other tools, such as Steve 3 or, Guardians with extra rerolls, or anyone who's giving you rerolls, stuff like Zemo, in Hydra or Cabal or whatever, where you're going to get some extra rerolls there. Anything like that that can help kind of turn his dice up to just being slightly more consistent, that can really put him up to 11. Because I mean, 6 dice attacks are already quite solid, but being able to make it, 6 dice with a reroll, or 6 dice with 2 rerolls, or 7 dice if you're playing, hammers, or one of the characters who can give you extra attack dice, like what's it called, Stark Armory under Iron Man, that sort of thing. Those sorts of abilities I think can really turn Thor up to 11, and they're kind of the what he's missing from being a kind of, centerpiece 5 threat for potentially a lot of lists, because I do think Thor has a lot of potential. I mean, for 1 threat less than the Hulk, which is, I think, one of his most comparable models. He's got 15 health as opposed to Hulk's 20, but he does have a flip side, so he can't be spiked down as easily, but also you can deny him more activations, so there's give and take there. He hits almost as hard as an undamaged Hulk, so 6 dice, which, yeah, that is certainly less, but it's a wild throw instead of a wild push, so you're getting a little extra damage back there, and it's a size 4 throw nonetheless, so you can really do some damage to some other characters other than your main target with that. You're handing out shocks, which is great utility from as far as range 5, which I personally think that attack is really underrated and should be used more often, because I do think it's a really good attack. And then, he's got that size 4 character or terrain throw. So again, that utility of, you have really, really solid control here. So, medium throw control is fantastic, or just extra damage, because size 4 terrain, turns out that hurts a lot. And size 4 character coming at another character, turns out that's even better. So you have that. You've got mobility, which is great. You've got the ability to throw out staggers. You've got a lot of really, really nice things on Thor's card here. He's just missing a little bit of consistency, and I think if you can give those tools to him, he can really, really shine. So that is pretty much all I have to say about Mr. Thor here. Let me know down below what you guys think of Mr. Odin's son. Is he a model you play a lot? Where do you play him? Where does he work out best for you? What kind of models really help turn him online, in your opinion? Love to hear what you guys think. I really do, because I love this model and I want to be able to play him more often. So really curious to see where you guys have tried him out and what's worked for you guys. Love to hear about all of that stuff down below. But my side of this is done, so gonna wrap up this video here. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please do drop a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. We do character spotlights like this every Wednesday and battle reports on Sundays. So if you're into either of those things, and I mean, you made it 35 minutes into this video, so I would assume you're at least down with the character spotlights. Feel free to go ahead and subscribe for more of these because they'll definitely keep coming. But yeah, that's all I got. So until next time, everybody, have a great day. Peace.